Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here and you like books, then you are in the right place. I read so many different kinds of books, and if you're only interested in some of these, you can navigate using the timestamps that I've got down below, so keep that in mind. But I hope that you'll find something interesting in all of the books that I've got to tell you about today. There are several readathons going on right now, and the ones that I'm participating in are Picture This, that's hosted by Jack and Shelly. I participated in an event with them and two other lovely booktubers, Dia and Alice. I'm going to leave information linked down below in the description box. You can find out more, but you can also watch our live event because it was recorded. So I will leave a link to that below. It was a conversation about why all five of us, who are adults, love to read picture books. The whole readathon is to encourage adults to pick up and read picture books for our own pleasure. Poetry Month is the whole month of April, and so I have been paying special attention to the poetry books on my shelves. I've got some of those to share with you today. Another readathon is People April. That's hosted by Elizabeth and Roz. Again, more information down below. This is to encourage us to read nonfiction, true stuff about people. And there's also Trans Girl April, which is hosted by Kevi, and this is to encourage us to read books written by trans authors. Now, before I get into the books that I have finished recently, just a little bit about what I've been doing lately. I've been learning to row. We've had 3 weeks of lessons so far. I do it twice a week on the gorge, which is a body of ocean water quite close to where I live. And I love it. Oh, if you are a rower, let me know in the comments down below. We're sculling, that's what we're learning. And so far I've been out in singles, doubles, and quads. I love it all. And a quick report from Gardening Front. It's dandelion season here, and I love eating dandelions. So recently, because so many were in bloom in my front yard, and I know that some of the neighbors worry about dandelion seeds blowing into their yard, so I picked a whole bunch that were in bloom and I made dandelion jelly, and I also plucked unopened buds, as many as I can find, and I sauteed those. I put some of them on pizza, and the other ones that I cooked I froze for later, because later in the season we'll still have dandelion leaves that can dig up the roots, but the flowers and buds will not be so plentiful later on. Let me know in the comments if you are also a fan of dandelions. And since it's Poetry Month, I am going to read you a dandelion poem from this trans indigiqueer author, Jaye Simpson. They are Ojikri and Soto from Alberta. Perennial love poem. My feelings are Narcissus, Pseudo-Narcissus, and Taraxacum officinale, daffodils and dandelions. Yellow flowering perennials, both aplenty in the dirt of my childhood. Daffodils die quickly, Persephone's sacrifice. They trumpeted the end of the stolen pagan holidays. They heralded her triumphant return. Dandelions are one of the first things a pollinator chances upon after winter, the first meal, the breaking of the fast. Every spring he'd show me the daffodil shoots, his smile kind. He'd ask me to pull the weeds in their way. Daffodils couldn't save him from the disease. She'd ask me to burn the tops of the dandelions to stop the spread of them. But when she wasn't looking, I'd blow the seeds off, see them dance and swirl in the breeze. They were the future, and unapologetically so. My feelings are Narcissus, Pseudo-Narcissus, and Pteroxacum officinale, yellow flowering perennial, daffodil, yellow flowering herbaceous perennial, dandelion. I never loved for long, fleeting and far between in the fresh soil. They were never mine for long either. Disease, decay, and rot taking place in tuber, bulb, and root. Like the perennial, returning once again, year after year, like the seed carried on the breeze and swirl of eddies. My feelings are daffodils and dandelions. And again, that was from J. Simpson's It Was Never Going to Be Okay. I'm recording this on April 18th, and it is the National Poem in Your Pocket Day. So there's a poem for your pocket. And next I've got a memoir for you, the Canadian author Margaret Macpherson. It's called Tracking the Caribou Queen. Margaret Macpherson grew up in Yellowknife, way up in the Northwest Territories. It's her childhood all the way up into young adulthood. She lived there until she was 17 years old. It's written in a series of vignettes of scenes that she remembers from growing up. Her childhood perceptions of the Dene and Inuit peoples that were around her. Her father was the superintendent of education in the Northwest Territories, and there was a residential high school there for students to come from small communities across the north in order that they could get high school education. So she went to school with them. But through this memoir, we see how at that time she was blinded to the ways that we absorb colonialism. When it's something we just live and breathe, it's all around us. And so she's looking at white privilege and questioning that, and sometimes the voice in it changes to herself as an adult, looking back on these scenes. So that reflective quality of this memoir I found very welcome. And the other thing is, I read this with the lovely Sarah of Roadworthy. If you are not following her channel, look for her link down below. She reads deeply and thoughtfully, and it was just wonderful to share the reading experience with her of this memoir. And Sean, the book maniac, had Margaret Macpherson on his channel about a year ago to talk about this memoir, so I will also include a link to that conversation down below. The Caribou Queen in here is the queen of a festival that they have once a year in Yellowknife. And when Margaret was little, she had a dream of being the Caribou Queen. And there's one point in the novel where she's entered her teenage years, and a woman talks to her about her desire to be queen and tells her, you need to be a servant. which kind of puzzles Margaret. But it's interesting that that came up in this picture book that I want to tell you about next, The Little Regent. And it's by a Nigerian-Canadian author, Yewande Daniel-Ayoade. And the illustrations are by Ken Daly. This is set in West Africa among the Yoruba people. And at that time, according to custom, when her father, the king, died, 8-year-old Abioye became the regent of her people. Because she was nervous about her role, she spent a lot of time observing, and she learned that the way to rule was to be a servant. Her appointment as regent was just for a temporary period. Within 3 weeks, the people were going to vote on a new king from 3 people chosen by the chiefs there. We'll see what happens. I picked up another picture book set in Africa, this time Mali. It's called Clothes, and it's by Ifeoma Onyefulu, who's a Nigerian-British writer and photographer. You can see that this picture book is suitable for very young children, as well as anyone who is interested in clothing in this part of the world. Maybe you're reading a novel set in West Africa, and this can enrich your experience. You can actually see a boo-boo and some other traditional clothing, like a wrapper and a bogolan dress. Love it. It's a nice, vibrant mix of clothing in there. Next, I'm going to tell you about an audiobook that I picked up at the encouragement of my sister, Zan. This is a classic, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Probably many of you have read this already, but it was the first time for me. And for people, April, this is a Holocaust survival story. Viktor Frankl was a young doctor in Austria before being sent to a concentration camp. Well, he actually was in several different camps between 1942 and 1945. His wife, his parents, his siblings all died in these camps. So in this book, he talks about how we can't avoid suffering in this life, but we can choose how we cope with it. And he came up with a therapy, logotherapy, that has to do with meaning and its role in our lives, meaning of our existence. There's a reason why it's so well known and beloved, and it is that it's a really good book. There is a readathon happening in May, hosted by Kim over at Middle of the Book March and Marilyn Maya Mendoza. Mental Health May. There'll be information down below. This would be a great book for Mental Health May, as well as for People April. And next I have another book about war. This one is a novel, Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan, who is a Tamil American writer. And this story is about a 16-year-old girl living in a village near Jaffna in the north of Sri Lanka. And it starts in 1981 and it goes through to 1989. She and her 4 brothers are in the middle of the war there. And some parts are really hard to read, but it is written in such a compelling voice. She uses second person, addressing us as the reader, and looking back on that time in her life, it's positively searing. It's one that I brought so much of my own experience to, not with war, so thankfully, but having spent 4.5 months in Sri Lanka in 1978-79, so right before the events in this novel. And the foods that she talks about, they just came back so vividly to me. The plants, the smells, the faces of the people, but I think anyone who reads this, you just can't help but feel for the tragedy, the extreme tragedy on all sides. Some of the horrors that are in this novel are in another novel that I read recently, Song of the Sun God, by the Tamil Australian author Shankari Chandran. Although that one covers a broader span of time, it's more of a family saga and epic. Scenes like the burning of the main library in Jaffna and the way that people were told to shelter in temples and churches, and then the Sri Lankan army targeted and bombed those churches and temples, and the massacre at the Jaffna General Hospital is in both books. Terrible, terrible things. Between the two of them, if you were only going to read one, I would definitely suggest this one. It is outstanding, and it is currently on the short list for the Carol Shields Prize, and it is longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. The short list for that should be coming out soon, maybe April 24th, something like that. And I hope this one makes that short list as well. Entirely deserving. Going to switch it up with something somewhat lighter. Magnolia Flower. This is a picture book retelling of a short story by Zora Neale Hurston. It's retold by Ibram Kendi, and the illustrations are by Loveis Wise. The illustrator that is non-binary, so once again, trans girl April. And I first encountered their work in a book I talked about in my previous video, Ablaze with Color, which is a biography of Alma Thomas. Magnolia Flower is the daughter of a man who escaped slavery and a Cherokee woman named Swift Deer. And the story is told by a river to a brook. Another fantastic book, and this is a way to share Zora Neale Hurston's writing with younger readers, as well as enjoying it yourself as an adult. And the last book I want to tell you about is an audiobook, James by Percival Everett. Now, this is my favorite of the bunch, and as you can tell, I really recommend so many of these books that I've been telling you about, but James, so good. If you're not familiar, it's a not exactly a retelling of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, but it's the story imagined from Jim's viewpoint. And I've read 2 other books by Percival Everett, and he does tend to write satire, lots of dark humor, very witty. That wit is there, but James is far more tender than his other books. He's leaving the satire behind. So if satire isn't your thing and you've been avoiding Percival Everett for that reason, please do think about picking up James. It is so well told. The audiobook is read by Dominic Hoffman, who just reads it so lovely. I might include just a really short minute of it at the end of this if you want to hear a little bit what it sounds like. In one of those examples of serendipity, James has a conversation with Huckleberry Finn about choosing names and how Indigenous people might have chosen their names. And he gives the example of swift deer. And in that same passage, he also tells Huck to listen because the river is talking. And if I hadn't just read Magnolia Flower, I wouldn't have realized that tie that he had to Zora Neale Hurston's story embedded in that passage in James. But I'm sure there are many other layers that you can find, depending on what other books that you've read when you read James. So not just Huckleberry Finn, but many others as well. Now, speaking of Percival Everett and his earlier novels, as far as I know, most or all of his previous books were published by Grey Wolf Press. James is put out by Knopf, which is a very highly respected literary imprint, a much larger press than Grey Wolf. So I'm happy for Percival Everett that his book has found this home. But Grey Wolf Press has got some very fine titles. They are celebrating their 50th year anniversary, and two booktubers, Sarah of Roadworthy, who I mentioned earlier, and another Sarah with Eyes on Indie, have got a readathon, Grey in May. So if you want to explore Grey Wolf Press's catalog, check out their announcement video down below. And also Sarah of Eyes on Indie has put together some suggestions already, and there will be more coming from those two booktubers. So 3 that I know of published by Grey Wolf Press that I heartily second their recommendations. These are The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Wei-Jun Wang. And this one would also work for Mental Health May, because the author writes about her own disorder of schizoaffective disorder. Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. And again, for Mental Health May, it's about bereavement. And the collection of essays Ongoingness by Sarah Manguso, which is about anxiety and compulsive behavior. So 3 books by Grey Wolf that are also perfect for Mental Health May. And that is all I've got for you today. So once again, thank you so very much for listening, for watching. I'm so happy that you are interested in what I've got to say about books. and I really appreciate hearing from you. So please let me know if you are participating in any of these readathons or planning to participate in the ones in May. Are you a fan of books by Grey Wolf? Picture books? Do you love picture books like I do? Whatever you want to tell me, I am happy to hear about. So thanks again. I'll see you all soon, and bye for now.
We drifted on, our silence becoming quieter. Listen to that, I said to Huck. What? Listen. I don't hear nothing. That's it, Huck. That's the river talking to herself. What's she saying? The boy asked. That's for her to know and for us to figure out. I looked downriver. There's another voice. Huck closed his eyes and listened. I don't hear it. It's the Ohio, Huck. She be telling that old Mississippi about freedom. I'm going to get me a job and save me some money and come back and buy my Sadie and Lizzie. Then they will belong to you? Huck asked. No. They just won't belong to nobody else. They won't belong to nobody. They be free.